YouTube, hi. It's been a while, and I don't really have a whole lot to say about that other than that life happens, and that I have a job, and 4 pets, and a wife, and a house to keep up with, and can't be doing as much yo-yoing these days. But as one of my 2025 resolutions, I decided that I really wanted to revamp my photography portfolio, a little bit of videography, do my whole website over, that sort of a thing. It's been a long time since it's been touched up. So I decided to start streaming my photo editing sessions in the meantime, and that may turn into more stuff. It may fizzle out. I don't really know. I don't know how much I'm going to be doing these sort of edited, post-produced videos, but for now, this is a fun outlet for me, and I'm going to use it as an opportunity to keep things fun and interesting and get to edit a bunch of different types of stuff in each session. Typically when I'd go out and shoot something like astrophotography, which you'll see in a minute, I would then be working on those images and solely those images for a while, kind of until I finish the set, and then move on to the next shoot and repeat the process. Since it's winter and there's not as much opportunity to shoot outside, and definitely the Milky Way isn't visible right now, this is a good opportunity to sort of sit down and work on a bunch of stuff. And I figured, why not enjoy that in the company of others digitally, rather than just sort of locking myself in a dark room alone for a few hours on end. And honestly, it's a bit of a cool accountability tool to actually finish those photos, because a lot of times the process is long and I'll get bored, I don't know, an hour into it, and then just sort of abandon things wherever they're sitting for something that is a little bit more fun. So today we are going to be going through an image that I shot in 2015, so almost 10 years ago, at one of my favorite locations in Oregon. By no means like a professional workflow. I'm not a professional National Geographic astrophotographer. This is sort of through the lens of a hobbyist astrophotographer, how I get a beautiful image out of something that maybe wasn't so great to start with. I'm hoping that with my 15-ish years of photography experience, and in the 10 years even since I shot this photo, I've learned a ton about post-processing, and I'm just hoping to maybe share that with people, just see where this goes. I don't really know if this is going to be a regular thing. I would like it to be. I'd love to be more consistent. That's just, me opening up about personal failings. Got a lot of good momentum in my life right now, and would like to get back online in a wholesome way and just sort of see where things go. So I'm not going to, beg you to like or subscribe, because I think that's icky, but if you do enjoy this, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know what you think, and let me know if there's another type of image that you would like me to go through a similar process of kind of how I start and where we end up with it at the very end of it. Hoping that if I can stay consistent with this for the rest of the year, I will have a fully revamped photography portfolio and a bunch of cool content on YouTube at the end of it. Even if that's just for me later on, to make sure that I go back and remember the stuff that I'm supposed to do when I process images, but we'll see. So thank you for clicking on the video. Appreciate it. Enjoy, and I'll see you soon. Love you, bye. I'm excited to jump into things. So let's get started. And I think I want to do something fun to start. So let's jump into some astrophotography. If I'm talking through my process from start to finish, the first thing I do when I'm looking at a photo is kind of just assessing a bunch of different stuff. We're looking at kind of like the angle, the tilt, the overall composition, how difficult it's going to be to edit if you get in really close, like how noisy is it. This one's actually not so bad. So when I'm looking at this, I'm very happy with past Aaron. 2015 Aaron got the focus right, which is honestly the hardest thing to do with astrophotography. Getting it just right is tough. And so this is a pretty dang good overall composition for me 10 years ago, being fairly inexperienced. So I jump into the develop thing. There's a lot of typically I'm not following any sort of like must do this, must do that, first, second, third, or fourth. The things that I look for initially are really just, let's enable some profile corrections. That's going to make some major changes right away and flatten the image a little bit, which is typically a good thing. You don't want to have too much lens distortion. You can look at like sharpening. Sharpening you can crank all the way up towards like 70, and it's going to be a good thing overall. So you can see when we sharpen, you're getting quite a bit more star detail as you get up towards the high 60s. So we're going to leave it around a 68. That's kind of my go-to. And then from there, we jump back up to the top. And a lot of these, so as shot, this was actually pretty dang dark right around here. Can't see much. Let's just bump it up. Let's stick it at 2.9, and all of this stuff is going to get tweaked as we go through, but you got to start somewhere, right? So we're going to start with exposure. Oh, and there we go. We lost the camera. Oh, okay. Technical difficulties will be the end of me. This is looking pretty good. I'm going to worry about kind of final crop dimensions and sort of stuff later. We're going to sit with this for the time being so that we get as much of the image in as possible, and then we can sort of crop down once we have more of a finalized styling. When I'm looking at this, I really like the star reflections here. I wish the Milky Way was more crisp, but we were a little early for it, to be honest. So we're going to see what we can pull out detail-wise. Otherwise, I just really like the colors and the overall composition. And so we're just going to start playing with some stuff. Contrast is typically a good thing to bump in there. It's going to give you a little bit more pop between the stars and the darker sky behind them. May also make your foreground stuff pop out a little bit more, which is nice. You add a little bit of dimensionality back to the image without rounding it in the way that like lens distortion would. And then we're going to start playing with some stuff. And a lot of this is just sort of like, what do you like? What looks good to you? So I'll just sort of move some of these sliders around. Highlights we're going to bring up slightly. Shadows we're probably also going to bring up slightly, but not enough to like, because you see if you crank those, you start getting this crazy stuff down here. And while I would like to get some of the tree detail, and we can bring some of the tree detail back in and then fix the foreground with masking later on, we don't want to overdo it. So I'm going to look at like right around in the 20s, bring up some of the shadows. Whites are going to really hit your stars. We could blow this out if we wanted to. We could mute them a little bit more if we wanted to, like if something in the sky was really impressive, northern lights, that sort of a thing. But as it stands, I think we're just going to bring that up slightly. And blacks, honestly, we could come up slightly, very, very slightly, just a touch up right there. Another thing with the sky, the stars, your white balancing, your temp and your tint are going to be hugely dramatized. Like they're going to be much more dramatic than in kind of daylight images. So you can see, you can get a ton of play in the sky and the stars in that, I think that was the moon that was setting. So I'm going to look for something that just looks pleasing to my eye. I like to go a little colder, mostly because it looks a little bit more natural when the sky is more of like a bluish green or even just a blue. I'm not crazy about this though. I do like having I liked having a little bit more warmth in this image. I'm gonna bring this down ever so slightly, like here. I like that a lot. And then your tint is also going to play, you know, green to purple. I don't want it to be too dramatic, and I want it to lean more green, I think. We're gonna set it at like a +5. And you can see there's still some like pretty crazy noise going on here. So one of the things that you can do is play with your manual luminance or your denoise. I typically like to keep all of the info in the photo and do that as one of my last steps and then do final tweaks after that. But I like to get my kind of colors where I want them to be and overall composition, and then I'll worry about denoising the whole thing. One of the steps that I skipped early, but could be one of the earlier steps, is also your clarity slider. Personal preference once again, but also kind of knowing your camera and your gear. For me, I know that my camera and lens typically do best right around like a +12 or a +14 on clarity. One of my favorite ones recently has been this dehaze slider, and you can very easily overdo this and make it way too crunchy, or you know, if you go the other direction, you're going to get a really washed out image. After that, we look at vibrance and saturation. If this were a daylight photo, I would typically go saturation up about 12, or vibrance up about 12, saturation down about 5. That's kind of my sweet spot. For something like this, it really depends on what you want out of the sky. You can see that you can get really, really bright, vibrant color differences. And honestly, sometimes this looks amazing. Sometimes it really looks overdone. You can overcook the image really easily doing this. So I'm gonna sit in that sort of 14, and then saturation. These things just behave very differently in star images versus images that are shot during the day. So you kind of have to learn both if you want to do both. So for this one, I do want to have a really healthy contrast between this bright orange, warm color, and then kind of the cooler green blue of the sky, and this variation between them. So we're going to try to sort of center this image edit around that concept of really bright pop of orange and then a cool overall image though. So now we jump into curves. Curves are just the freaking best. They're the freaking best. And the same sort of concept for daylight and astro images is pretty consistent, at least in my opinion. You're sort of looking for a bit of an S curve. Very, very slight, and then you can sort of tweak within that accordingly. And so a lot of times I'm just sitting here kind of shifting up and down, seeing what different parts of the image are doing. So depending on what I'm able to do with this grainy, grayish, purplish area between, these may be tweaked later on. And a lot of this is going to be like scrolling up, making a tweak, scrolling down, making a tweak, especially when we get into HSL. That's where things get real interesting. At least to start, I'm just going to apply kind of a general slight S curve. I'm going to bring blacks up just slightly. I'm going to bring highlights down just slightly, which will make it so it's impossible to really clip the image. I really don't mess with like red, green, blue often. There'll be some times where I do, but it's definitely not every image. It's not even close. Like maybe 10% of the images I'll touch RGB curves. Most of my color work I'll do within the color mixer module. So hue, we're looking at this orange because that's my pop of color. I don't want to turn it yellow. That makes the sky do some crazy weird stuff around here. It kind of looks cool, but it also just is a little bit distracting. And color in Astro is really tough because you don't necessarily see it at first, but there's like 4 different colors within here. You've got some red, you've got some purple, you've got some blue, you've got some green, and then stars are going to be all these different colors as well. And so you have to kind of be patient with this and make sure that the tweaks that you're making are pretty slight, at least at first. So I'm going to play with like each color individually because we're going to have so many different colors within this image. Like red isn't that effective. Obviously orange is going to make some major changes here. And I kind of like it going a little bit more red. And then we're going to play with yellow here to bring that. It looks like this patch, this kind of grayish patch around the stars is really reading as yellow within the camera, which gives us a little bit more control here. I don't necessarily want to make it super orange, but I do like leaning it towards orange. So you can see this band above the trees, that's reading very green. If we go in here, that's like that whole section is reading as green. And we want it to read more green because otherwise it's this kind of grayish, yellowish color. So I'm going to bring green up slightly. Aqua is typically where your stars are going to be, and you can see the sky shifting pretty considerably here, which is good. Aqua is a great color to work with, both with water and with sky. So I don't mind that very much. I'm just going to try to blend that a little bit more with the blues so that it looks a little more cool. And then you can see the blues, this whole top half of the image is really reading as blue. And you're getting some of the, like a lot of the bigger stars up here are reading very blue. So they can shift between kind of this aqua all the way to a purple. I like to have my stars kind of as white as possible. And so I'm going to play with that to get more of a neutral. And honestly, it might just be leaving it at 0. That might be the best thing that we can do here, is have them read more white. A lot of these you're going to want to just leave at 0 because otherwise you end up with more of this sort of like difference between patches in the sky. It becomes a lot more obvious when you play with these. So these are sort of at your own discretion here. You do need to be careful here, but I don't mind a little bit of cooking, you know? Let them cook a little bit. So we're going to repeat the process now with saturation and luminance. Saturation isn't honestly as impactful as luminance in my opinion. Greens, once again, it's that band right above the trees, and we can sort of play with this until it blends really nicely. And honestly, that's going to be kind of a tweak down on this image. Aqua, you can make the sky really gross. You can make it really gray, which also isn't super appealing. So we're going to find kind of a muted middle ground there. And blue, you can really see where those stars are. You don't want to make them like white because then you lose a lot of interest in the sky, but you also don't want to overcook those ones. I'm going to bring that one down a little bit too, just slightly. And then we may play with global saturation more. Once we know that these aren't conflicting, we're not getting any crazy banding. Like if I were to bring green way up, you can see this like gross splotchy band across the sky. We're going to bring that down. Same thing with purples. Purples aren't looking too impactful here, too punchy, so we're going to leave those alone. Magentas aren't changing the image much if you go 0 to 100, so we're going to leave those alone. And then we get into my favorite section here, which is the luminance. And this one will really make things pop. Sort of blend the luminance levels together here as much as possible, so that we don't get too much of that. Yellow is going to be another big one. You can see that whole section. You can kind of make it look like there's like some fog with the setting sun behind it, or you can make it look gross, and I don't like that. I don't like looking like we're going to Mordor. So I think that's going to get blended into the orange really nicely, right around like a 15. That's going to look the best. Green can make some things glow or look very Northern Lightsy. I don't want to do too much of that, but I do want to keep the luminance levels consistent. That's going to be like a low 20s, I think. Aqua, same thing. It's kind of like you're blending each color into the next. So if there was a lot more red in here at the core, you would blend that into the orange and so forth. And that's why it's nice to have one color that you sort of start with. And in this case, it's this orange. In other cases, you may be starting with like a yellow or a green. And then you sort of use that as your baseline to balance all of the other colors around for consistency. Blue is interesting because a lot of times your stars are going to read more blue than other things, and so you can see how big of a difference it makes. It almost looks like there's more stars in the sky if you bump that luminance up, and so I'm going to tweak that up, probably low 50s. You know, it's going to look like you crank the clarity slider if you go too far. You know, it makes the stars pop a little more. It makes the ones in the water pop a little bit more. It just looks good. Purple's not going to be super impactful. I think we're going to leave that. We might bump it a little bit just in case any of these stars that are trending more purple need to have a little bit of pop. Magenta, we can just leave it alone. If we had done the white balance more purple, this would obviously be a lot more impactful, but since it's sitting more green, we're going to be playing with greens and blues more than anything else. Honestly, my next step would probably be sit for a second, look at what the image is doing, and then start playing with masks. And rather than selecting the sky or doing like, what is it, vignette, when you're doing like a global sort of circular masking, I really love playing with linear and radial gradients. And the reason being that you can sort of feather them out and they're a little bit more custom than just slapping on a vignette. We want a similar effect to the vignette. I like having kind of a dark start and then it gets brighter and that feels like you're kind of walking into the image. But we may want that effect to be not as punchy as the one that we're doing on the top. So rather than doing a global vignette, I'm going to pop in a couple of these linear gradients. So the first one I'm going to do is starting from the bottom and going up. And I hate the red overlay, so we're going to get rid of that. And this is a good way to get rid of those. Look at all that noise in the bottom. So we can kind of black that out just to the point where we're not getting any of that gross stuff in the corners anymore. We can play with contrast. It's not super important here. Highlights we can bring up a little bit. Shadows we can kind of play with until we're not getting as much nasty corner stuff. But once again, we could plop a little bit of a vignette on here and it would look okay. Or we could bring blacks up and shadows down. That's one of my favorite tricks, to kind of soften your blacks on the edges. So something like this, where to the eye, you're not necessarily going to see that. And another fun trick you can do with these is you can change the color temperature. So we can make this very obviously water underneath. If we go more blue, we can make it reflect more of the orange if we go more orange. And you'll see that I'll frequently grab a slider and then just go back and forth between -100 and 100. And that's just to see like what are the ends of my spectrum here. What's the absolute max and minimum of whatever it is that I'm sliding around. And then I'll settle somewhere kind of comfortably that feels and looks nice to me. Another fun one here you can do is play with the saturation quite a bit. And I typically, because these stars in the bottom are looking more blue than the ones up here, I'm going to desaturate that slightly. Same thing with tint. We can sort of play with tint to make the sky reflect more green, or if we wanted it to be more purple for some reason. If the sky was more purple, that would make more sense, but we're going to tint this a little bit more green, I think. And what I want to do now is look at this. I think that's going to blend okay with the luminance stuff that we do later, but this is something that we may come back to. Then what I'm going to do is add another linear gradient. I'm going to come down from the top, and I'm going to layer the ends of them over each other, and they're going to kind of probably help cancel each other out a little bit, which is nice. And this side, I'm going to bring the exposure down slightly so that we get that sort of vignette effect, but not as powerful as on the bottom, because we still do want to have some detail here in the sky. And then we just start playing with the same sliders that we did for the rest of the image. We now get to kind of play with pieces of this independently, which is really fun. That's one of my favorite parts, is getting to, you almost get to edit like 5 images within one image if you're playing with your gradients. Because of the light coming in from the left, we may want this to appear more like we've got a little bit of left to right light play here, which I'm going to tweak that slightly and then keep playing with this. So we can bring highlights up. Maybe we bring shadows down in the sky, which is another trick to make your stars pop a little bit more against that background. We can bring whites up if we want more star light. I think that's a noticeable improvement. Play with some temp control, and this is a cool way to get like gradient within your sky. If I'm playing this slightly down, it's going to be more blue in this corner and more green down bottom left, which is a little bit of the gradient that I'm looking for in this image. I like having some play in the color in the sky. I think it just adds interest and can kind of help you also balance out if you still have some crazy color going on in your stars, depending on how you can like negate it, right? Like if it's really blue here, you can go more yellow, and that's gonna kind of even it out at more of a flat gray. So there's a bunch of different tricks you can employ to make your sky come out a little bit more interesting than where it started. I don't think I need to mess much with curves here. We could see how it looks playing with some of them. Honestly, bringing that down actually isn't so bad. So if we curve this up a little bit, so once again, we're just adding another S-curve layered on top of our S-curve to get a little bit more contrast in the sky. And I like that a lot. That looks good. I don't really worry about those just because layering texture, clarity, sharpness over already done sharpness for the image can get messy pretty quickly. So let's try a radial gradient just for educational purposes. So we can draw this radial gradient out, and then so the inner part is where the like effects are going to take place fully, and then the outer ring is how far it gets feathered out. And so what I like to do here is place this inner ring kind of on the brightest point of the light that's coming in. And then I may do this radial gradient is then going to kind of expand out from there, and that's going to feather it out. So this is sort of what we're looking for here, and you can really make just that spot pop or make it go darker, whatever you want to do. I like bringing that up a little bit And it works very similarly to that linear gradient. It's a lot of tweaking. Like now you can see, so these are the edits that I've got. If I were to expand this out, then everything within that circle is going to get hit 100%, versus if I do this, it's going to slightly be a little bit less intense. Honestly, the shadow detail gets really nice when you pop this out. There's enough light there that there is detail in the shadows, so I do want to kind of highlight that in these trees. And I like now how like the trees over here are black, and these are more of like a warm black. It adds depth to the image. You can then see that these aren't just tiny trees and these are big trees. There's a curve where these trees are closer to you on the right, and then as they get closer to the center, they're further out. So that adds a little bit of depth within the shadows subconsciously that I really like. So I think that's looking pretty good. Let's see what this looks like on and off. So I'll go down here and toggle these. So that's all the masks off. That's where we were just from editing with the kind of raw sliders, and then with masks on, you can see that that adds a little bit more pop here. And when I'm doing that, I can see that the lower gradient that I did, I actually like that a little less intense here. So I'm going to jump back into my lower gradient, and I may bring this down slightly. I don't necessarily need it going all the way up. And that's going to keep more detail here where the stars and the reflection on the water are happening. So that looks good. Try not to overcook it. If it were just me sitting here, I would probably overcook it. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll edit an image and I'll walk away for 20 minutes and I'll come back and I'll just be like, what were you thinking? This is hideous. Sometimes it's better to just get something done than to obsess over the details. So that's what we're working on in these. We are working on keeping things concise and accomplishing things. That's my goal, right? Gotta actually do stuff. Color grading is, I think, an overlooked module that not a lot of people play with. And if I'm being honest, I didn't either for a very long time. Probably just within the past 5 or so years have I really started messing with these. It can look intimidating, but it's really not. All you're doing is selecting an image or selecting a color within that sort of light, bracket, and then you're playing with the intensity of that highlight and all sorts of different stuff. And this is a really cool place where you can either negate or accentuate colors that are already happening in this image. So if, like, say for instance in highlights, if I was like, I wish this orange wasn't so orange, what I could do is go in and add the opposite color into it, like a blue or even like a purple. And that'll help change the color of those highlights. It's global across the whole image. I think that you can do this within the gradients, but I don't often play with it just in a gradient because a lot of times that'll make your image look extremely Photoshopped. But typically what I'll do, and this is a lot more impactful, I think, in daylight images rather than nighttime, but I'll just sort of circle around this and see like what looks cool. What's a cool color combo that I could be doing in my highlights here? What gives it a little bit more separation from the sky? What makes it really pop? We could lean more into the orange. We could go away from the orange. And I think to help blend this into the greens, what I may want to do is just do a slight blue and sort of counter it a little bit here. And so this is going to be like a low saturation, middle between blue and aqua. We're looking at like a saturation of like, I don't know, maybe like 17. Into midtones. This is going to play with your sky significantly. Looks pretty cool right around here, but that might be losing too much of the green. So I'm just going to circle around this a little bit until I find a color combination that I think is really pretty. And I think we're going to be somewhere in this purple range here. I don't want it to turn the sky not green, but I do want to soften that into more of a blue. So we're going to sit like right here. That's pretty cool. And then shadows. This is where in your daylight images, this is going to make the biggest difference, and things can get real ugly real fast. In the nighttime ones, it's going to change the color of your sky and your shadows, so it's also going to make it the biggest difference out of any of them. This can make stuff in daylight look really cool, really like vintage. This is how you get more of like a film look to digital images. Like, it looks cool when you cool the image down. it also looks really cool warm. So where do we want to be? I kind of like somewhere in here, and then really low intensity, like just a twinge of that blue is going to go a really long way in the shadows. So I think like a 6. And then you're going to see dramatic differences when you toggle these on and off in terms of like you can see how much warmer and greener it is without it. And then this sort of softens that green into more of a blue, and it turns the orange into this cool gradient of orange to purple and then into the green. So it's wrapping the whole color wheel. We'll go room temp with all the images. So we get down into some of our final Lightroom modules here. You can do manual noise reduction. You can do automatic noise reduction. If you go in manually, you can see that this is just going to blend a lot of those a lot better, but you're also going to lose some of the overall stars. But we can also do a denoise block here, which is going to create a new DNG after we get a chance to see kind of a preview of what it's going to look like. What are my stars looking like up here? That's actually not bad. That looks pretty dang good. You can see you lose a lot of that purple green mess that's happening in the deep shadows between the stars, and it's just going to turn them more of a consistent blue. And in here, same thing. That's going to help really blend those together. So let's do it. Let's go ahead and enhance. Enhance! Jarvis, enhance! See, we didn't lose as much star detail doing the automatic noise reduction, whereas in this, even tweaking detail and contrast, you're going to have a really hard time getting it as clean as it does automatically. And that has also fixed a lot of our issues in the bottom. So now that we've done this, I want to revisit the masks real quick and just see, like, if I bring this down so that we don't lose as much of the light here, and we can bring this, yeah, we don't even have to bring this down as much to get kind of a black edge that then fades. That's nice. And we may even be able to bring shadows up a little bit more. No, not too much. We got to be careful with that. We're going to leave that alone. We're going to leave that alone. We learned our lesson. So this is the image that we're working with at the end of our Lightroom stuff. You can also do some stuff with skewing and transforming. I prefer to do that in Photoshop personally. At this point, what I'd probably do is go back into the library setting for it. This is our DNG file. I'm gonna go ahead and star this at like a 4 because it's done in Lightroom, but it's not done, right? What I'm gonna do is right click it and go edit in Photoshop. And this is gonna bring up Photoshop. It's gonna plop the image right in. The cool thing about these two programs is they talk to each other. So as you make edits and then save them within Photoshop, that's going to apply in the Lightroom library. And to start, the very first thing that I do is make a new layer from the background. And I'm going to call this skewed. Did not mean to do that. I want to duplicate this layer and call it skewed. This is something that I learned from doing architectural photography. This is how you get your verticals all nice and lined up straight. So you can see when you scroll in here, some of these trees are leaning a little bit in. Some of that was fixed by the lens distortion that we fixed within Lightroom. And the reason that we duplicate rather than just working on the background layer is so if we did need to come in here, you can see that we still have sky behind it. This is particularly important in architectural ones. A lot of times you are duplicating layers multiple times, and then as you are like punching through or putting an adjustment layer on one and then masking it out in a duplicated layer, that's really important. Here, not so much. Most of my skewing is just going to be these slight tweaks out to the side to make sure that those trees are looking more vertical. And one of the important things that people don't realize too is that after you skew wider, you also have to go up. Otherwise, your image is going to look shorter than it did initially. And it's very minor adjustments, but that is an important part of making sure that your images don't look like tall things don't look bent in towards the center, especially when you're shooting wide angle like this. So from here, I may come in and say, like, I really like this star right here, right? So what I might do in this instance is come in and clone stamp this. I might steal that star and I might put another one there. And I might put another one here. And I might put this guy here. And this is how you can get a lot more, obviously stars in the image, but also like, I'm not in love with this tree branch being so egregiously horizontal. So what I might do in this instance is go in and clone stamp some of the sky, and we're just going to paint this out a little bit. And that way, when we're looking back at this and we're seeing the silhouettes of these trees, they're a little bit more separated out. I could even, like, this one's a dead snag up here. I may want to make that a little less prominent by painting out some of the edges of it here so that it's not taking up as much space in the sky. It's not overlapping with another tree. You can see I'm cleaning up that branch there so that you don't get the dead branch just kind of hanging there. Same thing with these. I'm going to clean up some of those branches so that they look a little bit better. And same with these guys here. It looks like my hair in the morning. And you want to make sure that you're pulling from areas in the sky that are very close, because we have quite a bit of variance in the sky in terms of colors. It's very easy to get like a smudgy sort of look here, especially when you've got, this is a very muddled area with a lot of like purple, green, red all mixed in. So you don't want to get too crazy with this. You really want to keep things tight and close to where they live in the image color-wise. Otherwise, it'll be very obvious that you have done this retouching. And what the heck is going on with this tree? Why do we look like that? Do better. Be better. So that's some example of cleanup that I would do on something like this. Same thing with like your noise in the corners. That's a good way to get rid of that. Let's just say that this was still really noisy. You can pull your true black and you can really paint that out down here. But where this comes in real handy is with something like this, where we want like, let's get like a 30. And I'm going to clone stamp this guy here, and then you can add more of those in. You can add more of these little reflecty boys in here, which is always fun. Love a good reflecty boy. And this is just how you can make some things look a little bit more dramatic. So you can see here what I because the water is lighter than black up here, when I painted that in, it came with a little bit of that water. So then you're going to want to go grab some of this water that's black around the edges and just make sure that that is looking realistic and you don't have green splotches all around your stars that you're painting in. Then as you can like turn this off to see what sort of, because we're doing non-destructive editing, and this is the background and then this is the skewed layer. And honestly, what I should be doing here is then duplicating this, and we're gonna go clone stamps, or even just, I mean, you can name it whatever you want. It can be edits, it can be fixes, stars, whatever you want. So this is how we're gonna end up with, like, I mean, depending on the intensity of the edit, it could be 3 layers, it could be 20, depending on how many things you need to go in and play with. But I'm going to go ahead and go in and grab some of these stars, paint a few more of these in here because I think they look cool, and I love things that look cool. We're going to make sure that they don't look fake, though. So we want to grab some sky or some water here that isn't the same color, and that's just going to make things look a little bit cleaner. So once again, water. This is a pretty tedious process, but it pays off so much in the end when you see the final image and just how much more like glittery and interesting and just beautiful it all looks. Totally worth it. And we can even bring this down since we're working with a much skinnier, these stars are really skinny down here. I want to put one of these here, and maybe I want to put this one, have that reflect like here between the trees. Then we go in and fix this. There we go. And if it were me, and it is me, but if you guys weren't sitting here with me, I would go in and paint in a metric buttload of these because they're just so cool. I am a slut for star reflections on water, and I'm not afraid to admit it. Chicka chicka, yeah. And then finally, once I've done my clone stamps, my punching through, what I'm going to do here is duplicate this one last time, and this is going to be my high pass. And we're going to come up to filter, we're going to go into other, we're going to go into high pass. You want to have it outline the things that you want more, I don't really know, just to pop a little bit more. It really is just pop. This is like the pop filter, to be honest. So we're going to go high pass. We're going to get this pop on here, and we're going to change the blend style to overlay, and we're going to change the opacity down to like 30%, just as a start. And it's very subtle, and you want it to be. You don't want it to be like, oh wow, that's blown out. And you can see that if I'm doing this at 100%, it's going to be way more obvious, right? That's going to really make the stars pop out. Maybe even like 40%. It really doesn't look that bad at 100, to be honest. This isn't a great example of an image with high pass that can get cooked, but it's looking pretty good. Yeah, it just gives a little bit extra pop to things. And it'll be a lot more obvious what we did when we go ahead and save this. So we're going to save the image. It's going to take a second because it's also got to talk to Lightroom. And then when we jump back into Lightroom, we've got 3 versions here. So this is the one that we edited and did the manual luminance. This is the automatic luminance. And you can see that it blends the colors a little bit better when you're doing the adjustment. And then the skewed and photoshopped and all that sort of stuff one is looking here. So this one, I'm going to mark as 5 stars. And I might come back into here and do like 3 on this one. So this is our stack. The one that we ended up with is this 5-star one. And if you unstack this and go into here and you look at like the X and Y, that's right, got to go into develop first. And you go into the before and after. There you go. That's a pretty significant change between those two. You can compare a bunch of different stuff, but that's going to be a finished one right there. So look at that. We knocked out one of our images first thing.